Hey guys, this is Super Tycoon, and welcome to my second Shogun 2 battle analysis. So this is another battle that I did with Vinu that I decided to analyze for you all for educational purposes. Check out the first part if you haven't already. I go through Vinu's experience level, my experience level. In short, he's newer to the game. I'm much more experienced, but he gets better and better as we go, so it's really cool to look at the various tactics I think we used in our battles because they're actually quite diverse. And Vinu gets better and better at his favorite tactics, so it was really cool to watch him grow as we kept battling. I won most of the battles. He won like two of them, and I have a replay of one of them saved, so I will show that at some point as well. But today I wanted to show you the third battle we did, not the second one. You might wonder why that is. It's not because I lost it. It's actually because I think I'll demonstrate it just to show that I'm not pulling your leg here. Let's watch this replay here. The second victory against Vinu. I I even listed it as such, but you don't need to take my word for it. You can actually look at Vinu's videos on the subject because he streamed the whole thing and had the Art of War playing in the background and stuff like that. So he came very prepared to try and beat me. But I want to show you this second battle just to show you that I'm not completely full of it or anything. I'm gonna fast forward here. So I went with a similar setup as before. If you watch the first video, you'll know exactly what I mean. Some fire cavalry, matchlock Ashigaru, mostly Yari Ashigaru for the melee, bow samurai to support the matchlocks, and then, some naganatas and katanas as reserve. And as you can see, the game crashes, and you might wonder why the game crashes when I play that specific replay. Well, there's some kind of issue with the fire projecting mangonels at the moment that causes the game to crash, and that's something that we noticed sometimes when we were trying to do battles as well. Vinu would deploy such artillery, and the game would just crash out of nowhere for no apparent reason for both of us, and we would lose connection. So we managed to get a few of those battles working, but it seems like looking back at those replays is now a problem. So something with the game was changed in a recent update because this has never been a problem before, but fire projecting mangonels are now a no-go. So any replay featuring those, at least for the time being, is going to be off limits. So definitely check out Vinu's videos if you want to see how that second battle went. My plan was kind of similar to that first one. I was trying to replicate what I did with the Takeda clan. So I suppose you're not missing a whole lot, unfortunately, but yeah, I would have loved to have shown it all the same. So I'll show you this one instead, though, the third one. It's where things change a little bit. So let's play this one. There is artillery in this one, too, and that's the other thing. Vinu actually brings a different type of artillery, and for some reason, cannons aren't a problem, but the mangonels are a problem. My computer has no problem running this game, so there's literally no reason for this, but even my old computer, which is not so good, just didn't have any issues with this, so I don't know what's up. See my FPS counts just fine. Like, there's nothing wrong here. So, alright. But fire projecting mangonels, by the way, as a tip, they're not very good. They're not very accurate. They look really cool. They make these big fiery um, explosion. They shoot these balls of death, right? But they're just not as accurate as you'd hope for artillery because, they're mangonels. They're not supposed to be accurate by modern standards, but all the same, yeah, many people think they're among the worst units in the game. They're only good for sieges. You can use them in sieges where an enemy's stationary and get some success, but otherwise, you really shouldn't use them anyway. But, it kind of sucks that we can't look at those replays, because Vinu didn't know that. He was just picking artillery and having some fun, right? And learning as he went, as you should. So, my army, as you can see, things get moving pretty quickly because I have to attack. Matchlock Ashigaru, once again, down the line here. Got about 4 units of them. Then the bow samurai to support them. I always like to have bows supporting them just because they have the extra range. And bow samurai are a particularly elite unit, so kind of nice to have them. A bit expensive. They don't always pay for themselves, but if you use them correctly, they can be a nice support. And I've got these fire cavalry. Contender for the best cavalry in the game. 3 of them on the flank here. sort of stacking the flank a little bit. And then, of course, we got the Yari Ashigaru, a nice cheap unit, and it's hard to beat them for bang for their buck, so that's why I went with them, very cheap. And in spear wall formation, they can't even hold their ground against samurai, so they're pretty useful for that. But if something goes wrong, we got Naginata Samurai as a reserve. One of my favorite units because they're very defensive in nature. They can hold the line very well and defend against missile fire. But they're also not bad as far as attack. And then you got Katana Samurai here. I like to bring these guys as well. They're like your superstar sword melee infantry. Not very historically accurate. They got sword samurai being such a good unit, but it is what it is. Total War does that type of thing for balancing purposes. So you can have more diverse units instead of just like Yari everything, maybe some Naganatas here or there. Um, yeah, so let's see what Vinu brought before we forget here. So he brought these European cannons, which are a really interesting unit in the game. And they're exactly what they sound like. They are Portuguese cannons that the Japanese have adopted. If you're familiar with the TV show Shogun, these are definitely a very welcome sight, though the ones in Shogun are more advanced, clearly, than these cannons. That's part of the story. Of course, it takes place in 1600. This is probably more like, 1570 or something. So that makes a lot of sense that, technology will have advanced. And then Vinu, having learned from me, because I taught him about the spear wall formation. So he's got these Ashigaru arrayed in a defensive formation. He's also brought some Yari Samurai to back them up. Yari Samurai, to be honest, aren't really that great. I think Ashigaru beat them in a spear wall formation anyway from the front. But if Yari Samurai can flank them, they can still do some damage. Yari Samurai are really only good for dealing with cavalry. And I guess one advantage they do have is they're more mobile than an Ashigaru unit that's in spear wall. But overall, I'd say Ashigaru beat them. But yeah, you can see he has another Yari Samurai. Yari Samurai. He actually brought quite a few, it looks like. I'm refreshing my memory here. It's been a little bit. And he's also brought some matchlocks. He's recognized, of course, that they're pretty good from the beginning, and he's bringing them here, going with a pike and shot setup with no cavalry, obviously intending to hold this position against my attacks. And it's actually kind of difficult to attack with cavalry. While these cannons aren't that great, if you ask me, they're great in sieges, but they're not that great in field battles, if you ask me. They just don't do enough, and we'll see that play out here. They do take casualties, though, and they will inflict damage on morale, so they're not something I can just ignore. And if Vinu were to turn these cannons onto my cavalry, actually, they could do a lot of damage to horses. That's something cannons are very good at. So something I was very wary of going into this battle, because if he had aimed these cannons directly at the horsemen, they might have actually done some real damage. But instead he aims for my missile units here and my infantry. You see some bouncing cannonballs there. A guy takes a direct hit. There's some blood, but he's fine. This guy's fine too. That's the problem with the cannons. They look more effective than they actually are. They'll blast holes in your line, but men will literally just get up. But aiming for my missile units, while it might not be the best option in hindsight, I think it makes a lot of sense. Because if my range potential is gone, then I basically have to attack him in melee one way or another. Which could be to his advantage if he can deploy those spear walls properly. And here I'm really focused on taking this archery dojo because I know I'm going to be fighting at range a lot. In fact, I get these Ashigaru into their staggered skirmish formation. Loose formation is what I should call it. And this basically makes it even harder to hit them with the cannonballs. They're definitely taking their toll. It's not like they're not killing people. But you can imagine if there was a matchlock unit shooting at these guys, they would do a lot more damage. And these cannonballs do come through and hit some of these Yari Ashigaru as well. But ultimately, he's not stopping me with this artillery bombardment. And we will carry on our advance once we've taken these dojos. We played our first games with dojos because it was kind of fun to fight over these points, but we eventually realized they could be exploited a little bit, so we got rid of them eventually. But It is what it is. So you can see, like, my men are at least concerned. It's not like these artillery are doing absolutely nothing. Some brutal hits here. But only 110, 109, like, that took out one guy. It's just not worth the cost. My understanding is these artillery are also worth a lot of money. And we'll see how many kills they actually got after the battle, because I'm curious to look, but I suspect they did not really pay for themselves here. And ultimately, the range engagement is gonna favor me in the long run, despite the casualties I'm taking. So Vinu sends out these two Yari samurai to try and chase off my gunners. It does work. I don't want to get my gunners stuck in the melee, so... And they're a bit ahead of the Yari wall formation here, the pike block. Not much of a block here, just the thin line, because I don't want to take too many casualties from these cannons, and you can see they're still hammering me. Such a beautiful game, by the way. I love the smoke effects of the cannons. So it's amazing that even the new Total Wars don't look as good as Shogun 2. I don't want to rant about that, though. There's channels out there that do that already, but yeah, man, Total War has fallen so much. Anyway, I tightened my formations here to make my volleys more powerful. Still, the Ashigaru are doing fine. They're taking some casualties. But what I'm doing here with these bow samurais, I've snuck over where the trees are, and they're going to start shooting their bows from longer range than the guns can actually shoot. And this is going to catch Vinu off guard. And because they're arrows and not bullets, they're less visible. Though I say that, these flaming arrows might have given Vinu a clue if he was looking, but I think he was focused here, and he was focused on the fact that I'm flanking. Eventually he'll notice that I'm flanking with these matchlocks, which is just decimating this line of Yari Ashigaru. And my goal here is just to chip away at his formation before I actually attack. I've got cavalry ready to charge him down when the time calls for it, but I see no reason to charge in. At this point, I just want to take out as many of his men as I can. And already one of his cannon crews is almost completely decimated. And one of his matchlock Ashigaru is taking some stray shots as well. He charges forward again with these Yari samurai, but I back off. And I know these Yari Ashigaru can actually take them on head on. So I get them formed up. They're ready to take him if he decides to charge forward, which would be a huge blunder. And I think he notices that, so he backs off. I back off with these units too, as these Yari samurai could easily reach them otherwise. And these artillery crew barely hanging on, but they're gonna be taken out. Kind of a useless target to spend arrows on, probably, but you know, it's doing some damage. I do switch though to these matchlocks, as they are a graver threat for sure. And he does get some shots into my pike line, which is very unfortunate. But I've got this flank going with these matchlock Ashigaru, so he recognizes the danger, especially as I send these cavalry in too, and backs off. He has this unit in front still in a dense formation, but they are continuing to take flanking fire, and they've taken a ton of casualties at this point. Yeah, they're just completely... I don't know what Vinu's doing with them. Unfortunately, sometimes formations glitch out, as with any Total War, and eventually he's able to turn around, but he's taken a lot of casualties in doing so. And I'm not faulting him for it. It's just the game being janky, and his men are not firing back for some reason. Yeah, I don't know why. Maybe it's that they've taken so many losses so quickly, but at this point I have my bow samurai aiming at these Yari samurai now. A very valuable target. They are heavily armored, but bow samurai can still get some kills over time, especially if they stand still. And I consider them valuable enough to waste arrows on. Perhaps the matchlock Ashigaru would have been a better target, but still worked out nicely in the end. They got enough kills. And he sends this really slow block of Yari Ashigaru forward, and the problem is they're in spear wall. And Vinu might not have been aware of this, but when they are in spear wall, they are quite slow. He breaks spear wall here briefly, probably figuring that out. And I do threaten to charge him with the cavalry, but I don't actually commit. It just looks a little too sketchy with all these spearmen around. Spearmen can easily counter cavalry if you're not careful. And here he does send some matchlock Ashigaru as he finally notices that my bows have been just slaughtering his men. But at this point, I move them. Eventually. They actually don't take very many casualties. I send my cavalry in to stop these guns. But my both samurai are out of ammo, actually. So they've done their part. And this spear wall here is going to continue to take gunfire and just get decimated. And as you can see, Vinu's range potential, his artillery might have even run out of ammo in a lot of cases. That's the other thing. These artillery don't have unlimited ammo. So he can't sit here forever, and I'm relying on that. At some point, he's either going to have to charge forward, or he's going to have to... Or he's just going to get decimated, essentially, over time. Eventually, he does choose to charge in. I actually charge in these bow samurai. They're out of ammo, so there's really no point in running them away. Might as well kill some units. I tried to charge them into some of the matchlocks, actually, because I know they would beat the matchlock Ashigaru in melee. But instead, they're just holding up some of these spear units, which is fine. And as you can see, I deploy my cavalry, so... let's do this in slow motion. This happens pretty quickly. So he charges down the center with all of his units. That's like his favorite tactic, like I've been saying. He'll get better at it as we go, but here his units are weakened, and his units are not going to take favorable engagements against even a thin spear wall. It will not go well. But to make things worse, these cavalry who have been hanging out on the flank, I moved them pretty far to the flank so he couldn't see them. And some of these spear units are also moving slow because the spear wall, which doesn't help. And these units will suddenly slam into the flank as they slam into my infantry. Classic hammer and anvil tactic. And these units here that are not engaged will eventually swoop around and swing around, and we will just envelop his men and win the battle. So you see so many units down the middle. It's actually kind of precarious. I'm lucky his men are low on morale, and I have Naginata Samurai to back up those Ashigaru, as they might eventually lose otherwise. And you can see I finally deploy these cavalry, and they're just gonna immediately rout this huge blob of men. He's got some units in reserve. These matchlock Ashigaru already wavering though, because some of my cavalrymen have engaged them. And these spear wall are facing the wrong direction, possibly have already routed and come back. But they will rout from army losses anyway, so it doesn't much matter. And his general here is the last unit, I think, to rout. Yes, it is. But he is eventually killed as well. And so that is the battle. It is a complete slaughter at the end there as I bring in my cavalry again, my signature tactic there of the Takeda clan. Vinu did a good job, I think, of trying to hold a defensive position and try and prevent me from using the cavalry so easily, but I think the cannons were just not worth it. I think that's the big problem that he had. So let's take a look at the kills. I'm actually really curious about this. I looked it over after the battle, but I don't remember everything, so... Okay, so as you can see, again, my army's quite cheap by design. Like, I've got really expensive cavalry and, like, one expensive skirmish unit and a few samurai, but by design I have all these cheap Ashigaru, so I had so much more numbers than Vinu. And actually, despite the losses looked pretty severe when he was using the cannons, at least severe enough that they were noticeable, right? But in the grand scheme of things, you can see I only lost 371 men in that whole ranged engagement. And the melee, in fact. Whereas we killed 964 of his men, which is a much larger proportion of his force, too. And some of these were friendly fire, apparently, but it doesn't much matter. That happens. I'm always careful to avoid it, but sometimes things just happen, straight bullets and stuff. My general did not take part in the battle. I generally don't use him unless things go really wrong in the battle. But I will try and use him to rally men if needed. The Takeda Fire Cavalry basically took 0 losses. And they got a bunch of kills to their name. More than the Matchlocks actually did for the most part. So they actually played a huge role in the final stage of the battle. Matchlock Ashigaru, we're looking at, you know, they got some pretty serious kills too, some of them. 131, 129. The Ari Ashigaru, again, they're more of a holding force, so I don't expect them to necessarily kill that many men, but they held their ground, and many of the units didn't lose very many men, so they still did their job. This unit of Naginata Samurai doing really well. This Katana Samurai didn't seem to really participate in the battle, interestingly enough. I might have forgot about them, who knows. But in theory, they're supposed to act as a support. But you can see these European cannons here, like I was trying to say earlier. They got, like, what, 10 kills, 31 kills, 31 kills, 29 kills. So it looked somewhat bad when you looked at the individual units they were hitting, but overall, they just weren't killing very much my army. And we'll have a look at how much they cost, actually, because I'm kind of curious, but it's not worth bringing them, really. They don't bring that many men to the table, they don't kill that many, and even these Yari Samurai, it turns out, didn't really do all that well from the front. His matchlocks seem to have been his most valuable unit, which goes to show that artillery in the traditional version of Shogun 2 just isn't that effective. And that's sort of to be expected, I think, because artillery is relatively primitive compared to the 19th century, for example, but you know, it is kind of funny seeing cannonballs hit people and then people get back up, but that's kind of how it goes. I think it's the armor save that decides that, but I'd have to look into that. Okay, so let's modify this army here. I'm curious about the European cannons. So those are worth 1,200 Rio, or whatever this coin is. I think that's Rio. Anyway, not that important. But compare that to, like, Yari Ashigaru 400. But if you look at, like, 450, that these guys are worth 450, and they got 3 times the kills. So, at least on my side, they got 3 times the kills. So, these cannons just are completely worthless. They're among the worst units in the game. I think they're at least better than the mangonels, though. The mangonels can only hit something if you manually aim them, which is something you can do in the game, but lessons have been learned for sure. Vinu figured it out eventually that these cannons are just not worth it, so he gets better as we go, and he does a great job in future battles, so I can't wait to show those. Sorry for the delay between the videos, by the way. I've just been busy with some things, but I hope to produce more videos eventually. I do go on a trip tomorrow, so a 2-week vacation, so don't expect anything like very soon or anything. But if I do find time to produce more of these, I will today, so you might see some more videos get uploaded, but no promises there. Odds are you won't see anything. So yeah, that's the video. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.